Hi, this is Randy Wilt, and just recently we returned from Israel and Jordan. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the trip and just kind of give you some ideas about what was actually going on in those different countries. So moving first here, let's talk about Israel. Is that Israel has, of course, been open for business for some time. But there seems to be a new influence coming into Israel, not only the Christian tours, but of course the Jewish tours, but people who are going to try to find out a little bit more about the Jewish nationalism. So let's first take a look here at the map, and you can see, of course, where Israel is surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea on one side, but to the north is Lebanon and Syria. And then to the east is Jordan, and then, of course, to the south and southwest is Egypt. In the Sinai Peninsula is, of course, part of Egypt. Now, when you look at Israel, this is a great map. I'm going to talk a little bit more later about the three different components of Israel, and we'll talk a little bit more about the disputed land. But you can see here that right off the bat that you can see that Israel is divided into that part. Now, everything's controlled by the state of Israel, but you can see the West Bank where Bethlehem, Hebron, and Jericho is. And then you also can see Gaza. Both of these are Palestinian controlled by the PLO. Now, Gaza, of course, is controlled more so by Hamas. If you go up to the north where Lebanon is, a little yellow, that's controlled by Hezbollah. Now, when we went to Israel and Jordan, we basically went to Israel for three various reasons. Number one, of course, is the Christian tour, to understand more about the life of Christ and what he did during his ministry here on earth. The second part, you go to understand a little bit more about Judaism. And the third part is to understand about the Israeli Jewish nationalism. And I'll be talking about that at the very end of this presentation. So flying in, of course, if you look at the bottom left, you can see part of the wing of the airplane. Here is Tel Aviv, and that's where you're going to fly into. And of course, here's the coastline of Tel Aviv. And here's a little better picture that I took from my hotel. Now, I do want to tell you, as we go through this presentation, some pictures are going to be a little fuzzy, kind of like this picture right here. That's because it's an actual picture I took. Some pictures are very, very clear, and those are pictures that my pictures did not come out as good, so I went in there and either pulled a picture offline, or online, or maybe I brought in a picture to help explain, like a picture of a map in there. So you'll be seeing kind of the difference in those. Now, of course, here is the beach, and this is from a hotel, and we were there over 2 holidays. We were over there during Jerusalem Day, which celebrates the 6-day war. When Israel, this was back in 66, 67, back when Israel expanded their territory. And the second holiday where this was taken was Pentecost. Now, you think Pentecost is a Christian holiday. Of course it is. That's when the Holy Spirit came. But Pentecost is also a very, very major Jewish holiday. Pentecost means 50. And so what it is 50 days from the day of Passover. Remember Passover in the Jewish traditions when Moses told the Hebrews to put the blood of the lamb around the door and the angel of death will pass over it. Well, 50 days later is when supposedly Moses got the 10 Commandments. So that is why they celebrate that as a major holiday. Tel Aviv is the main city in Israel besides Jerusalem, but interesting enough, Tel Aviv, go back 50 years ago, basically, or even probably longer than that, go back 70 years ago, basically was nothing. It was just a desert little town. It had nothing going for it all. But then it became this metropolis with lots of people in there. I think there's like 1.2 million people who live there. You can see by these pictures of these different buildings that it's an area that is very much of a business center. Now, what's very interesting about Tel Aviv is only Jews live in Tel Aviv. You do not have Muslims in Tel Aviv, so they're a very, very small percentage. You do have some Christians live in Tel Aviv, but it's a Jewish city. That's the reason why when you hear about Gaza, Hamas in Gaza shooting missiles, you never hear them talking about shooting missiles to Hebron, or to Jerusalem, or to Jericho. those are places where you have Palestinians living, you have Arabs living, but they will shoot to Tel Aviv. And the reason why is because you have basically no Arabs in Tel Aviv. You have just a Jewish settlement, a Jewish city. Now, a little bit off from, as a suburb of Tel Aviv, is Joppa or Jaffa. And Jaffa is the old city of Tel Aviv. This goes back for thousands of years. In Jaffa is where you find the Arabs and Palestinians and some Jews living in the same little city. So once again, if you're an Arab or Palestinian, you would not live in Tel Aviv. You would make your homestead somewhere in Jaffa. And of course, Jaffa is where Peter had the sheet come down from the Lord that had all the different things he could eat. And of course, Peter says, I won't eat anything that's unclean, talking about things that are kosher. And the Lord said, whatever I consider clean, you can eat. And Jaffa is a great little city to go to. The first place we actually visited was going to the north, up around the area of Galilee. Now you can see here it says Megiddo. Megiddo is what we called Armageddon. You can see that if you look at the word Galilee on the map, down in red below that is Megiddo or Armageddon. According to the Jews, there have been so many battles in this area. Now, we always think about this is going to be the final battle. This is the battle between good and evil, Gog, Magog, and all those things in Revelation. But there's been multiple battles in Megiddo all the way back thousands of years, but all the way to the current. There was actually some battles there back during the 6-Day War. Now here's a picture of Armageddon or Megiddo. If you take a look at it, you can see there's a big pasture land in the center. And supposedly this is where the Battle of Armageddon is going to occur. Now in that same area around Galilee, you have the Church of the Loaves and Fishes. And this is, of course, where Christ took the loaves and fishes and he divided it and multiplied it and fed the multitude out of it. Looking back again, here's our map, and you can see where Megiddo is. North of Megiddo is Nazareth, and then you've got Magdala. You've got south of Magdala is Tiberias, that's the largest city there. And then, of course, north of that is Capernaum. Now, let's talk for a second about the Sea of Galilee. This is the area where Jesus started his ministry, coming out of Nazareth, and he did most of his early ministry in that area. The Sea of Galilee is a great place. This is a picture of it from our hotel. And if you look at the map here, you can see that the Sea of Galilee is fed by the Jordan River, which comes up higher, closer to Mount Hermon. And you get up there in the area, and Mount Hermon is going over in outside. That's going into the area of Syria and Jordan, that area. And you see I have Caesarea Philippi marked because we did go up there, and that's the area of Dan, and that is the most northern part of the 10 tribes. Remember, we had 12 tribes. 2 of the tribes, which is going to be Judah and also Benjamin, made up the south kingdom, and all the rest of them made up the north kingdom. And again, here's another picture from our hotel room of the Sea of Galilee, in case you want to see that we're actually there. There we are. Now, the Sea of Galilee, of course, is where Jesus started finding all of his disciples, and they were fishermen. One of the things, there's a little museum there called the Museum of Jesus Boat. And here's a picture of Jesus' boat. Now, I will tell you, even though they seem to think this is the boat that Jesus was in, I don't believe it. And I don't think they believe it either. I think this is kind of a little bit of a tourist thing. But they did find this boat about 15, 17 years ago. Actually, that's when they actually preserved it. They found it a little bit before that. They found it buried in the mud along the Sea of Galilee, about the place where they think Jesus had walked. And they had preserved this, and it's not particularly a long boat. I would say it's probably maybe about 11 feet long, and they're saying this is the boat of the 1st century. So that is real. They were able to carbon date it back to the 1st century. But this being an actual boat Jesus was in or sailed in, probably not. Now, if you do go to Galilee, you'd certainly have to eat the fish that the disciples were catching. Remember, that's what they were. They were fishermen. They were catching a fish, and this is the fish that they caught. This is actually called a Peter fish. Now, if you look at it, it does not look tasty. This is the way to prepare it. They just grill it whole like this, and you have to eat around the head and the scales and the bones and everything else. The Peter fish is really no more than tilapia. So what you get here at maybe a local restaurant, or you can buy at the local grocery store, the same thing they have there, because that was the Peter fish. That was the fish that the disciples were catching, and that was tilapia. Now, going a little bit south to the west, you go to Nazareth, and this is, of course, where Jesus grew up. Nazareth is an interesting city. You can see this picture by looking at this. You can see Nazareth, the city in the background. No skyscrapers, but this town where when Jesus grew up, they say it was probably about maybe 250 to 300 people, has now swollen to about 50,000 and is all spread out. Is a mixture of Palestinians, but primarily Jews, but it's a mixture in there. It's not in the West Bank, so therefore this does not fall under Palestinian authorities, which means you don't have a Palestinian mayor. You have a Jewish mayor, but this is an area that has a combination of both Palestinians, Arabs, Jews in there, and Christians. And what you're seeing down here in the bottom area here is the beginning of what's called Nazareth Village. Nazareth Village, and I do want to make a comment first to tell you how they find all these things. Now, many of the sites in Israel, they were found back in the 300s. Excuse me. And the way they were found is that Constantine's mother, Helen or Helena, she was a Christian. She started looking for the sites, and she did it based upon tradition. Now, there's a big difference. I'm going to be talking about this, about what is traditional and what is actual, or a excavation that they think is actual. Traditional means that it follows the story of tradition. So when Helen was looking for places like where Christ was the tomb, she would have her people to ask around. People would say, well, this is where we think it is. And they would collaborate a bunch of stories. And as they found more and more people saying the same thing, this is how they came up with the idea, is that this is where things occurred. Now, that is what we call the tradition. The actual is where they've actually done excavation. They have gone in there and they have found the remains of walls and houses and pottery, and they can actually piece things together. That's the case with Nazareth. Now, what you cannot see here in this picture is behind this, there was a hospital behind there. It was a Christian hospital. And this hospital was taking care of people, and as they were starting to look at trying to expand, they started digging down. They started to realize they were actually finding a village that dates back to the 1st century. And the more they dug down into it, the more they realized we have found the real village of Nazareth. And that's where they started to dig into it. And I would say about 30 to 40% of everything in Nazareth village is authentic, is actual. Then they went in there and they built up what was missing. So, for example, they found many houses where as they dug down, once again, they dug down into the ground and they found these houses. Basically, most of the house, maybe it was missing the roof, but they found the walls, they found the potteries in there. What they could not find, like the synagogue, they went in there and actually built it. Now, the Catholic Church was the one who went in there after Helen, and throughout the years, the Catholic Church has gone and they've looked at different sites, and we'll tell you about that here when I talk about Magdala, and they've bought up the land to preserve the sites. And you say, why did that happen? Well, it happened because they knew that the Israeli Office of Antiquities was looking for things that were Jewish. When we got things that are Christian, they were not as concerned about it. They were not that concerned as you and I would be very concerned, or maybe tourism is concerned. So the Catholic Church, anytime they heard about something, they would go and they would buy up the land and continue with the excavation. And so this was actually done by a Protestant group, and they run this thing called Nazareth Village, and they would go in there, and here's an example of a house. You can tell here, this is the actual walls of the house in the time of Jesus. The roof, probably those wooden beams there, they had to come back and add it in there. But let's say that you want to retire and go to Israel. Maybe you wanted to work in Nazareth Village because they give tours. So this is an opportunity for you to actually go in there and to be part of the 1st century. And here's a guy. These are all volunteers, and you can see how they tried to build everything. Kind of reminds you of going to Williamsburg, but what you're actually seeing is you're seeing the way Nazareth was back in the 1st century, the way they took care of the sheep and the goats. Remember, I told you they rebuilt things what they could not find, but so much of it they found. One of the things they could not find was a synagogue. So here they reconstructed the synagogue based upon the sizes that they know and the information. You can see it's not actually very large, and this would be where the scroll, the Torah, would be, and whoever's reading the Torah would stand behind and would read the Torah, then put it down. So that's pretty much what Nazareth was. You could see the city, but they did fortunately find where the true village was. Now, if you go up to the far north, toward the northeast, you hit the Golan Heights. And the Golan Heights is an interesting area, not so much in terms of Christianity or even that concern about Judaism. It's more about Jewish nationalism, because the Golan Heights was under the rule of Syria. And Syria had gone in there and they had built these trenches. And this is one of the areas that they attacked Israel from during the 6-Day War. Now, since then, if you know the story of the 6-Day War, Israel was attacked by Syria, a little bit by Lebanon, but by Jordan on the east and Egypt on the south. And in the process, Israel not only pushed them back because they were trying to get rid of the Jewish state, but they actually pushed them back. They took more land and Israel grew substantially. I'll show you that at the very end. But this is one of the Syrian trenches and bunkers that they had in the Golan Heights that they were actually shooting and shelling down to Israel. Now, you sit there and say, well, that's pretty cool about the Golan Heights. But what is the Golan Heights really known for today? Well, guess what? It's known for wines. Yarden, which is an Israeli wine that you can actually buy in the United States. That comes, and this is their vineyard right here. And a lot of Israeli wines come out of the Golan Heights because it's the same area like, let's say, would be in Napa or Sonoma, where it gets cool at night, it gets warm in the day, and of course, and the wind blows, causing the grape branches to become stronger and stronger, and that's how they produce such good grapes. Now, that's where we were up there around Caesarea Philippi, even north of that. Now we're going to go over to the west, and when we go to the west, we're going to hit Caesarea Maritime. This was one of Herod the Great's palaces. He actually built this city from scratch. And on the left, you can see a picture of the city. He built this. He named it after Caesar. I mean, he didn't name it Herod Maritime. He named it Caesarea Maritime. And this is one of his northern areas, kind of like a summer palace, because getting up here, yes, it's hot, but it's not as hot as would be down in the southern part of the country. So looking at this, I'm going to show you a couple pictures. You can see this is quite a city. And if you look over here to the right picture, you're going to see the Hippodrome, where they actually had the chariot races. So this was a very elaborate city. This picture will show you a couple things that's kind of interesting. First of all, you can see some of the ruins of the city, but I want you to look over to the picture of the right. Now, you see that kind of dark shading in the ocean. I'm going to go back and show you, look at that picture to the left. You see how the harbor is built. They have the walls going out around the harbor. That's where the boats would come in. This was a major area of a major port, for Israel. And that's one of the reasons why Herod built it there. So you can see here the remains of those walls that formed that harbor. They're under the sea now. The sea has moved up. Obviously, it's taken into some of the land. People go diving down there. They're still finding stuff. One of the things we're told is that every time they go down there, they find more pottery. They've found coins. They found a lot of different things. Now, going down to the south, and we're still staying in the area of Galilee, you hit the city of Magdala. Now, you remember from the Bible, Magdala is where Mary was from, Mary Magdala. And Magdala is not a particularly large city. It's a city right now about 25,000, but they think, once again, like Nazareth, that back in the time of Jesus, that it was a small town, probably between 150 to 250 people. And what you're seeing in this picture here is very interesting. Now, this is where I'm going to try to make the distinction between tradition and actual, because this is a picture shot of Magdala going back about 14, 15 years. And if you look at it, you can see that big pile of dirt in the center. That pile of dirt is where they started to build a shopping mall, and they were going to build a big hotel complex. along the way, and just north of it, you can see some ruins. As they were building, they hit ruins. And of course, when you hit something like that, the Israeli antiquity, everything stops. They come and take a look at it. And they started looking at this and realized that what they found was a synagogue. Well, the people who actually owned the land was the Franciscans, the Church of St. Francis, the Roman Catholic Franciscans. And so they allowed the Israeli antiquities to go in there and take pieces out of it, but they own the land, so they continue. Now, if you were to go there today like we did, that pile of dirt now is a very large hotel. There's some shops around there, but the excavation still remains there. Now, why this is important is because here's a picture of the excavation, of how they were digging. And the way they do that is they go out there and they work in the mornings and they're digging in the afternoons. It gets too hot, and that's when they're looking at what they actually found. Now, here's a picture of the synagogue. And you can tell by looking at this is that, it's not really clear where things are. So the next picture is a little bit more clear. Go back and think about that picture I showed you of Nazareth village. Remember where the scroll is? Well, that is that block you're seeing right in the center of this picture. That was the block where the scroll, that's the actual block where the scroll will be laid out. So you can see the seatings on either side of it. And I'm sorry that the picture doesn't show you the steps, but right at the very bottom, there are steps going down into the synagogue. And why this is so important is because we do know that Jesus did go to Magdala. We know that he did go into the synagogue, and they have the historical facts about that. And we know that he actually went in there and he read out of the Torah. So where you have a tradition like this is where we think the crucifixion was. This is where we think Mary was born. This is where we think the loaves and fishes. Here's a case where they actually do know. And that is what's so cool. This is probably, to me, one of two of the coolest things in Israel, is that you're literally seeing, thinking about, behind that little block there, that is where the Lord stood. That's where Jesus stood and read. Now that, to me, is awesome. That he walked in here. He actually was in this place. And the Franciscans are doing a great job they're trying to go in there and dig more. And what you cannot see to the right is you can see the different shops and some houses that they are also excavating in the process. Now, moving down, you go down. Remember, Galilee is fed by the Jordan River, and then the Jordan River goes further down from the southern part of the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. And here's a picture of the Jordan River. Jordan River is fascinating. Here's a picture of Janelle and I in front of the Jordan River. Now, I was there with Janelle back in 2013. At that time, I was at a baptismal site. I didn't get baptized because I baptized myself unintentionally, because I didn't realize where Janelle is standing, the next step is not a step, but you hit the ground of the Jordan. That tells you the Jordan at that part is not particularly too deep. Where that is. But I do want to go back here and just point out to you, remember what's on the east side of the Jordan River? The country of Jordan. So here, look how far it is between Israel and Jordan. Now, people say, so does that mean kind of like the Rio Grande that you can swim across the Jordan? Of course you can. But what do you get when you get to the other side to the country of Jordan? Well, basically, you're in a desert, over there. So that's the reason why you don't see it being fenced off or anything else. Can a Jordanian come across? Yeah, it could, but they'll probably get caught by the Israelis, and they'll probably be sent back. So that just is a good example of how close they are to Jordan. And once again, there's that picture. Now, after Jordan, you can move a little bit over to the west. And once again, now you're in the desert. And that's where you hit the city of Jericho. Jericho is a fascinating city. And the reason why is the longest inhabited city in the world. It goes back to 5,000 plus BC. And how did they figure that out? Well, this is a picture of some of the excavation in Jericho. But here's a little better picture, because what they did, now Jericho, if you remember the story of Jericho, is that the story was that Moses, he brings the people out of Egypt, and they get right there on the about ready to cross the Jordan River, which is just a little ways away. I mean, we were not too far away from Jericho. Jericho is extremely hot, one of the hottest places I've ever been in my life. I think we were there, it was probably like maybe 102 and a heat index 110. Yeah, but this was the land of milk and honey. And Moses is telling the Hebrews is that, he says, this is a place. He sends over 12 spies, one from each of the 12 tribes. They come back and only Caleb and Joshua. Joshua is pronounced Yeshua ben Nun. And that they came back, only those two said, we can take it. It's the land of milk and honey. The rest said they could not. Well, because the people were against what God told them to go take it, then they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Then they come back after 40 years. All the generations have died. Anybody who was over the age of 20. And then, I believe that that's correct, about the age of 20. And then they attack and they go over there. And then Joshua, they circle the city. The whole story about they overtake the city. Now, Joshua, when he went into Jericho, this was Canaan, the land of the Canaanites. And like I keep saying, the land of milk and honey. But the Canaanites were not the first people there. Matter of fact, when they were doing the excavation there in Jericho, they would go digging down. And what you would do is as you dug down, you'd find a city. Well, you would keep digging down. You would take the artifacts out and you dig down, you find another city. Then you dig down, you find another city. And each time you dug down, you found a city. They dug down, they found 23 cities. That's how they can date it back to 5000 BC. And as you dig down, how do you know these are different cities? Because you can find the artifacts. And the easiest artifact to find is the pottery. Now, I'm a little amateur archaeologist. I have a bunch of different pottery samples. And let me tell you, through the years, pottery changed. Not only from the color to the way they painted it, to not painting it, to the lip at the top, to how big the base was at the bottom. So this is how they could tell that it was the Iron Age or the Bronze Age or whatever it was. So that's the fascinating part about Jericho is that they dug down, they found 23 layers of city. Now you can imagine how far they were digging down. And this is the case where they're down to the 23rd city. And they dug down some below there and they found nothing, and that's why they stopped there. Now, I keep saying land of milk and honey. So what do we think about when we think milk and honey? We think the cow's milk and we think the honey from the European honeybee. That's not the case in Israel. In Israel, milk is goat milk and honey is the syrup from the dates. They have all these date trees. They have thousands of date trees, hundreds of thousands of date trees. So when you talk about milk and honey, you're talking about goat milk. It's always funny to me because back when I was growing up as a child, I remember seeing the nativity scene. You had all the cattle out there. Maybe they had some cows, but they really were not milking the cows. They had lots of goats and sheep, and they would not use a sheep milk, but they would use the goat milk. But they did not have bees. They didn't have the African bees. They did not have the European bees. So anytime you go to Israel and you get honey, you're not getting honey from the bees. You're getting date honey, which is kind of cool. I have a little jar of that. Now, talking about milk and honey, let's talk about the food for a moment, just what it was to eat food in Israel. Israel is a very kosher country. Now, when I was there in 2013, I don't remember it being quite as kosher. Maybe it's just because I didn't go to the right places. But as I've been there this past time, the restaurants are extremely kosher. And one of the things about kosher means that you're separating the meat from the dairy. Isn't that fascinating? You cannot combine them together. And you're probably like I am. The first thing that came to my mind is, what about the cheeseburger? You got a piece of cheese on top of a piece of meat. Well, you're not going to have that if you go to a kosher restaurant. McDonald's over there is not a kosher restaurant, so yes, you could get a cheeseburger. But I went to several restaurants and I could get the meat. I could have the pickles, I could have the tomatoes on it, but I could not have mayonnaise and I could not have cheese on it. Those were the dairies. You do not put the dairy with the meat. So that's something kind of interesting. Now, let's talk about when you're actually going to eat someplace that is a kosher restaurant. Like I did several times, different restaurants, also in the hotel restaurants too. When you dine, you will have to sit at either a meat table or a dairy table. I happened to be sitting at a meat table with some of my friends, and there we could order lamb, we could order beef, we could order things like chicken, we could order fish, we could get our vegetables, but I also wanted to get some cheese too. I wanted to get a dairy product, but I couldn't. I said, can I get a cheese tray? No, you cannot. Now, think about it here in the U.S. You ever order one of those charcuterie boards where you get meat and cheeses? Oh, that's a no-no over in Israel. You get a meat board or you get a cheese board. They told me if I wanted the cheese, I had to move to a cheese table, which was in the next room over. It kind of blew me a little bit, but as you can see here, you can get meat, you can get cheese. Here's an actual little menu, but before we look at the menu, I want you to look at the left side here at the examples of kosher food. Kind of interesting. Dairy, milk, cheese, yogurt. Foods are processed on dairy equipment. Butter. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Now, what are your meats? Your meats are your beef, your lamb, your venison. Includes chicken, turkey, duck, and geese. In neutral foods are going to be your fruits, your vegetables, your eggs. Your eggs are not dairy. Interesting. Fish is a neutral food, which means that you can actually eat fish on the dairy table, or you can get fish on the meat table, grains, nuts, and seeds. Now down there he says, it shows you examples of forbidden foods, which are going to be pork, anything a reptile, not that I hope you're going to eat a snake, but in shellfish, which didn't bother me because I'm allergic to shellfish. No lobster, oysters, mussels, shrimp, or scallops. And anything that comes from an animal that's an organ, like a heart or the brain or the liver, couldn't eat that. Now look at this menu here to the side. Under the dairy, you can get a pizza, lasagna, or pasta. Don't think what you're thinking about the lasagna. The lasagna is a cheese lasagna. There's no meat on that lasagna. You'll be very disappointed if you think it is. Look at all those salads. Tuna salad. Remember, you can get fish under the dairy menu. You can have tuna. But on the salad, don't ask them to go in there and to put something like, beef strips on it. Same thing, look at your sandwiches. You could get tuna, egg, avocado, cream cheese. Interesting, pastrami and salami. So you could pick up those, but you cannot have a roast beef sandwich. Now, if you go over to the other side, you're hitting more of the meats. So here you got your chicken. You can get your chicken, you can get your soup. Your soup is chicken with the matzo ball. You get your butternut squash, of course. You can order fish. Now, that salmon fillet with mashed potatoes, you could get that also on the dairy side. Now, one of the things you're not seeing here, because this was a primarily dairy restaurant, you're not seeing the lamb or the beef. You do see the chicken. You do see the fish. The fish is okay anywhere. But I could almost guarantee you this restaurant that if you were sitting there at the table and you ordered a cheese pizza, don't try to put hamburger or pepperoni on that pizza. You got a cheese pizza and your friend next to you tries to order grilled chicken breast, the waitress will say, no, I'm sorry. It either has to be a dairy table or a meat table. You would have to move or you all have to order a dairy products or meat products. Something just kind of interesting on that. Now, the Sabbath. The Sabbath is interesting. Remember, the Sabbath starts at sunset Friday and goes till sunset Saturday. During that time, they cannot do any work. The Orthodox Jews, and for that matter, all the Jews will follow this to a point. They will not do any work. And the reason why I had this picture up here is because I remember going on that Saturday morning for breakfast, and I was sitting there looking, and I thought, okay, nothing here is hot. Everything is cold. They have vegetables, they have fruits, they have salads, they have bread. Everything is cold. The salmon is cold. And when I asked for a latte or a cappuccino, they told me they could not make it because they cannot do any work on the Sabbath. So what they do is they have a jar or have the dispenser of hot water and the instant coffee. And you make your own coffee. They cannot make the coffee for you. I'm not a fan of instant coffee. And all those items I could eat, the salads, the fruits, the cold vegetables, all those were cut, prepared before sunset on Friday, put in the refrigerator. So Saturday morning, to feed the tourists like me, they just take them out of the refrigerator and they put them out there. And the bread was made before sunset on Friday. A little bit about what it is to eat kosher and to eat on the Sabbath in Israel. The next place we went to, probably the most exciting, was Jerusalem. And here's a picture of Janelle and I from the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is known because of all the olive trees. This is, of course, where Jesus, the night he was arrested, he was in this garden of Gethsemane, and all the olive trees. They like to say this tree here existed all the way back to the 1st century by tradition. You look at some other trees and you start to realize pretty quickly this tree here is probably about 400 to 500 years old. I'm not so sure the olive trees actually can go back 1,000 years. They say they can, but you really don't see that much. But it is cool to see these very, very old trees. One thing I can say is the trees are not particularly very attractive. But they do bear olives. Looking over the Mount of Olives, this is the Kidron Valley, and then over here you can see the wall, and you can see that little gold dome. That's because we're looking at the Temple Mount. What we're seeing there is the Golden Gate, or the Eastern Gate. And this is a gate where the Jews believe the Messiah will come through. Now, the Muslims actually bricked up this gate back when they had influence, when they had conquered Jerusalem. So that gate is actually sealed, and I'm going to show you another picture of that in a moment. Now, when you go to Israel, one of the coolest places to go to is the Israeli Museum, because outside they have this fairly nice, large replica of what Jerusalem looked like in the 1st century. So this is as if you're at the Mount of Olives looking at the city. And what you're doing here is you're seeing the city around 70 AD. Now, there are 3 different walls, and this will make a little bit more sense to you here in a second, but what you're looking at is the Temple Mount, and you can see the temple right there in the center of it. And then you can see to the left, you have a section. That's the old section. It's actually called the City of David. If you go over to the right of Temple Mount, you can see that is the Antonios Fortress. And then further to the back part of this, you can see where the city was being built, going all the way from probably before the 1st century through the 1st century in there. Here's another, probably a little bit of a closer picture, and you can see that the city that was to the west, which is behind the temple, because once again we're looking behind the temple now, you can see it's built more in a Romanesque style. So these are areas that are built in the 100s BC all the way up to the 100 AD. So you can see it's very much Romanistic. But if you look down here to, let's say, the 4 or 5 o'clock, you can see that is the Jewish area. That was the older part of the city, because you can see how those were built differently in there. Now here's a picture, and if you can take a look here, you can see that at this point we're looking at the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. Now we're looking at the south wall of the Temple Mount. But what you're seeing here is the city of David. Now, if you remember your Old Testament, Jerusalem was originally, it was a city that was controlled. It was built by the Jebusites. And the Jebusites lived down there in this area. And David and his men, they came through and they conquered the Jebusites. And the way they did it, if you remember the story, is that the way they get their water is that they would dig a passage underneath the ground, going outside, going over there toward the Mount of Olives where the wells were, the underground springs, and the water would run through. Well, David and his men they went through those water tunnels, and that's how they attacked the Jebusites, and they took the city. Here's probably a little better picture of it. Now, one of the things I want to point out to you here is you can see the wall. The wall, and we'll go back here, you can see the wall around that. That's the first wall around that little area. Then the second wall kind of goes a little further. So here we go. You can see the wall on either side of it. But the point I want to make here is, remember, David could not build the temple. God said you cannot build the temple. Solomon, his son, built the temple. But if you remember the story about that David was in his palace, and he was looking out, he saw Bathsheba out there bathing, and that's when he had an affair with her. the city of David was built on an incline. And as it was built on that incline, David's palace was one of these on the right side, center to the right side, and he could look down. We'll go back here. He could look down into to the city below him, and that was the case where he could see Bathsheba. Now, once again, here is the Temple Mount. But what I want to point out to you now is look where the temple is. The temple is right in the center of the platform. The platform is on a mountain, and the mountain is called Mount Moriah, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the temple itself, you had the area for the Gentiles, you had the court for the women, the court for the men, you had the court for the priests where they could sacrifice. You had the holy place, which was the beginning of the building, and then you had the Holy of Holies, which was the back part of the building. Now, what you notice there is that that building is shoved to the very western part of the platform. So it is on top of the western wall. That's the reason why, and there's the western wall. That's the reason why the western wall, where they used to call the Wailing Wall, but the western wall is considered the most religious site for the Jewish people. And the reason why is it's the closest part to where the Holy of Holies was. So here you have, remember the temple was torn down and burned by the Romans around 70 AD, or I think maybe 68 AD. So here's a picture of the Western Wall. And I'm going to show you now. Take a look, and you can see here. And once again, look over there. You see those four columns, or those four towers? That's the Antonius towers. That area was the where the Romans had their fort, they were stationed. That's actually where the court was that tried when Pilate tried Jesus. But that wall going across there, that is the Western Wall, and you can see there right in the center is where the temple was, and then right below there, that's the Western Wall. Now, when you go to the Western Wall, a traditional thing to do is that you write some type of a little prayer or a need that you have for God, and you can see them. People will stick them in between the crevices. The Jews will do this thinking that God will deliver those prayers to them. A lot of tourists would do this. But you also see here, and I'm going to show you this next picture, is that it gets fairly busy. This was at 8 o'clock in the morning. So this was not busy. Around noontime, this place would be packed with people. And going back here, you can see they will take their chairs, they will sit there, they will read the Torah, they'll have Bible studies about the Torah. You have a lot of groups of children who are being taught by a rabbi there. You will see people singing and dancing. You see men in a circles singing Jewish songs, going around in a circle. So it's a very, very busy place. And of course, as a non-Jewish, I could go there, but I would have to get my kippah or your yarmulke. You put that on, and it is separated. And you can see the separation. You see those little white tent things. What you see in the back is the men's section, and what you see in the front, you see a little bit of it, that's the women's section. So the men could not be, and the women could not be in the same area with the men. So you go into different sections. Now, of course, the main reason why a lot of people go to Jerusalem is to follow the path of Christ toward the crucifixion and the resurrection. And that was called the Via Dolorosa. And that's the path that he took. And the first thing I want you to do is show you a little map here. This is Jerusalem. If you take a look at it, you're going to see Jerusalem is divided into basically 5 sections. You have 4 quarters. The Muslim quarters, the Jewish, Armenian, and the Christian. And then you have the Temple Mount, which is not part of any of them, but is basically, now this is interesting because it is actually controlled by the Israelis. However, there is a mosque up on top, and you can see you've got 2 mosques. You got the Dome of the Rock, which is not really a mosque, is more of a museum, and then you had the Al-Aqsa, I probably said that wrong, mosque, which is a silver dome mosque, and that's literally a mosque. Now, 5 times a day, the people from the Muslim quarters will go up and pray at the mosque. The other place they'll pray to is, you see up there, you see that is just to the right of the Dome of the Rock is a Golden Gate. That's another place they will go and pray. And that's considered where Solomon's throne was too. Now, going back, looking at the Muslim quarter, you can see that over to the top, probably around that 10 o'clock area, you see the Church of St. Anne. That is, St. Anne was the mother of Mary. This is where they think she was born by tradition. This is basically where the Via Dolorosa starts, and it goes down. And if you follow that little path of Via Dolorosa, you end up down there at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and this is in the Christian quarter. So I just want to show you this to kind of begin with, so you have a kind of a good idea, is that you got 4 quarters. There's no walls between them. The wall goes around. You see it says the Old City Wall. The wall goes around it. So you really don't know that you're going from one quarter to the next, except for by the way when you see the people. So in the Jewish quarter, you see a lot of Jews. You see, I'll show you some in a moment. In the Muslim quarters, you see people wearing their habib. In the Muslim quarters, when it's time for prayer, they all are going up to the Temple Mount to pray. The Christian quarters, you don't see as many streets in there, but still you see a lot of vendors. You see a lot of Jews in there too. In the Armenian quarter, you see more people who look Armenian in the process. Now, here we go again. I want to show you. So that's basically what you can see when you're seeing this. And once again, you're not seeing the walls because everything is kind of blended together. But let's talk about now about that last week of Christ. He comes into Jerusalem. He comes up the south steps. We'll talk about that in a moment. But then let's take it all the way to that Thursday where they have the Last Supper. And this is the room that is by tradition where the Last Supper, and also upstairs from this room is where they believe Pentecost occurred to by tradition. So after the Last Supper, Christ goes to Gethsemane, and there he's praying. That's where he's arrested. And then they take him to Caiaphas' house. Caiaphas' house is way beyond where number 14 is over there. Is way over there in that area. And they take him to Caiaphas' house. And then they take him to Pilate. Now, Pilate is there in the Antonius Fortress. And that's where number 1 is, the Antonius Fortress. And this was built by the Jews, by Herod, as a very small little fort. But then the Romans got in there and actually did build a very large fortress. And this is where Pilate saw Jesus. Now, people say, is this where Pilate lived, where he stayed? No. Pilate actually lived out there. He spent a lot of his time out there as Caesarea Maritime. But when he came into Jerusalem, he would actually take over Herod's house, which was over there close to Caiaphas, which is way off at 14. But he would do his business there at the Antonius Fortress. And the reason why he came in is because it was Passover. And of course, he thought there was going to be some type of disruption. So they were building up the Roman forces to watch for. So this is where the Via Dolorosa started. And here's a picture of the Antonius Fortress. And this is what it looks like on the inside. And what you really can't see back behind here are those 4 towers. Here's a picture of Janelle and I as we're kind of overlooking that. Now, the Via Dolorosa starts down. Remember, the reason why you have all these different numbers, because at each one of these places something happened, where either Christ drops the cross, his brow is wiped, or he sees his mother Mary, or, he gets help with the cross. So each one of these, and this is by tradition. Everyone says that they don't think it really happened there, but these different locations, but who's to say? This is a picture of as you're walking down the different streets following the Via Dolorosa. The reason why I show you this, I'm not sure why we have one picture of nothing but crosses in the center, but the reason why I show you this is you can see the walkways are very narrow. Look at the one on the right side there. So, it was very narrow. You think there's lots of people every place. No, there's not. As you're going down, there's not much room at all. As a matter of fact, you're going through the Muslim quarter, and you can imagine when all the Muslims are going to the Temple Mount to pray, how packed this is. So we had to get in there and move along the Muslim quarters and walk to Via Dolorosa between the time they were going to prayers. And of course, here we go. You can see where they start around the Lion's Gate, and they go down and they go on all the way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Along the way through all the Villa de Rosa, you have the Israeli army there, and they're all prepared with their weapons. But I do want to show you, if you look at the top left, you can see that this is station number 5. I don't know exactly what happened to station number 5, but you see it says Villa de la Rosa, station number 5, and it has Jesus carrying the cross. So along the way, they will have these things marked in there. Now, here we start again. I know you probably said, why do we keep seeing these maps? Well, you're seeing these maps because along the way you see the different churches. You can see the Church of the Flagellation. You see the Church of St. Veronica. Remember, Veronica was who wiped Christ's brow. So along these ways, you have these different churches being built. Who built these churches? The Catholic Church built most of them, but you see now you have the Coptic Patriarch. And then next to that, you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and then you have the Greek Orthodox Patriarch, and then you have the Greek Catholic Patriarch. Then you have the Church of St. John the Baptist. So you have your patriarchs who are in Jerusalem of the different faiths. They're all surrounded around the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So here we go. We're walking down. Once again, you can see you're walking down here, and you hit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is where the crucifixion occurred. Golgotha is where the tomb is and where the slab was they prepared the body to. This is the entrance to the Holy Sepulchre. Now, Helena, she built the original church here. It's been built about 3 different times. It was a smaller church, and you're going to see a picture of kind of what things look like. But when they built the first church, it was built upon where they traditionally thought Golgotha was and the tomb. Over the years, the churches were expanded. And here's a picture of the inside, the floor plan of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And what I want you to look at, don't worry about the red part, that's just what's on the picture. But I want you to look at is, if you look at that little red circle, go over, see the entrance court, that's where you come in, and you see right to the right of that is Latin Calvary and the Greek Calvary. And then you see the Rock of Calvary. So this is Golgotha. This is where Christ was crucified, right there on that point, right when you walk in, right to the right, and this is what it looks like. Now, if you know anything about the Greek Orthodox, because the Greek Orthodox, are the ones who control this part of the church, they are very big about being very ornate. So it's not a matter of keeping things looking the way it did back in the 1st century. They're going to go in there and they're going to make things very ornate. And so you see this little, it looks like an altar in the very front. That's not an altar. There it is actually where you could go, and there's a hole there. You can put your arm down the hole. Your arm goes down maybe about 2 feet, and you can actually touch the hole in the rock where the cross was. Once again, by tradition. I didn't do it, but there's quite a long line of people doing this. And of course, for a lot of people, to touch where they think the cross was is something that's a very memorable event. Now, going back to our little floor plan here, so that was the Greek Calvary, and then the rock there is over there where the Rock of Calvary is. Now, from that point, after they took Jesus down from the cross, remember, they took him, they were going to put him in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, but they have to prepare the body first. So by tradition, if you look just to the left of where the word Greek Calvary, you can see the stone of anointing. And the stone of anointing is a marble slab here, and here's 2 pictures of it. You can see on the left side, and then here on the right side is a marble slab where Jesus' body was prepared and anointed with oils, once again, by tradition. Then, after they were anointed, after the body was anointed, then they took him to the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Now look back over there to about the 10 o'clock position. You can see in the rotunda, you can see what's called the Holy Sepulchre. So the reason why it's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is because this is where the tomb was. And they built a Holy Sepulchre, kind of like a little church on top of where the tomb is. And this is what it looks like. So as you can look at this here, you see they built it up fairly high. You see they're doing some construction around it, but you get in line and you work your way into it, and you get to the very front of it, and this is orchestrated by the Greek Orthodox. They will let you go into it. You could probably get like maybe 6 or 7 people in there, and you get to stay in there all of about 15 seconds because they're getting you in and out, in and out, in and out. So as you get inside, now you're seeing the tomb where Jesus was buried, and there it is. And you're going to say, what is this? Well, once again, because the Greek Orthodox control this, the Greek Orthodox are very big, not about keeping things looking the original, but to make it very ornate. So you see the flowers on the right side, the red flowers, okay, that is on a shelf, a marble shelf. If you look down below it, I'm sorry, I was being rushed through here. I couldn't get any more, but there's a marble slab, and that is where the body was laid by tradition. Now, do I believe this is where Jesus was laid? Yes, I do. I'm not going to say that's exactly where he was, but I do think that Helen probably did enough work to know that he was someplace in this area and that all this kind of falls together. And the way you can look at this is that this is a great diagram of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So take a look first. It says the original rock. How in the world do they spell the word original? Okay, someone didn't spell it right. The hillside of 30 AD. In 326, that's when Constantine became emperor, and that's when Helen was working. To find these places, they went there and they cut away the rock. So you can see what the rock looks like. So go over there to the rock. You can see Calvary. And as you're looking at Calvary, you can see where the cross is. That's still there. They still left that part of the rock. And you can see then the cave that goes into where the tomb was. That's what Helen found back in 326. But they didn't want to leave it where you walk into the cave, so they started cutting back the rock, and they cut back most of that rock in 326. And so you can see there the burial chamber from 100 BC to 100 AD was, you could actually walk into it, but by 326, it wasn't there anymore. They built the church. And then as we move forward to today's time, you can see the outline of the church. You can see where the dome, where they built, and you can see the outline of the Holy Sepulchre that's above the actual cave area. So that's the reason why I do believe they probably got this pretty accurate. It's just that when you go into it, you just don't have the feeling like, okay, I'm not really entering a tomb. When you see Golgotha, you don't really feel like you're seeing a hill. Instead, you're just seeing a little bit of a rock back there that's encased. But in any case, it's a good representation. Now, here's my little thing again, here, my little model. And what I want to show you here is kind of interesting because remember, they would not crucify anybody inside the city walls. So if you look there to the center, to the left of the center, you see a little doorway to the wall, okay? And if you see just to the left that you see some rocks, that is Golgotha. And so they think, and when they constructed this, is that they brought Jesus out, and that was Golgotha. Now, first thing you're going to say, where's the skull? Well, they didn't quite build it that way. But then you sit there saying, where's the tomb? Well, if you go a little bit over to the left, you start seeing it sinks down. So that's a high point right there. So it starts sinking down, and then they're saying that's where the actual tomb was. So once again, Golgotha and the tomb, they're outside of the wall. This is the second wall. The first wall was the city of David. Remember when David took over the Jebusites? The second wall was built around, and then the third wall is built beyond that point. And the third wall, inside the third wall, is where the Romans had most of their houses. And that's where you find, some of the houses. You find Herod's palace and things like that. So here we see the whole thing again. Now we're looking at it again from the Mount of Olives. And you have a little closer picture here of it. And now we're going to talk about the Temple Mount. Because the Temple Mount is Very, very important. What I've told you so far was geared a little bit more toward Judaism now. I mean, what was Christianity? Now let's talk about some Judaism. You can see where the temple, Solomon's temple, is built. It's in the center. The actual Holy of Holies is far to the west side. You can see the eastern gate down the very bottom. And over on the very left, you can see, you can't really see it, but you see the steps up to the southern gate. So looking at this picture, now you can see what it looks like with the Dome of the Rock on it. And then what it's kind of hard to see, but far to the left is the mosque where the Muslims will go pray. And here's another picture of it. And once again, it's kind of interesting when you look at this. Now, to go up to the Temple Mount, in the time of Jesus, you would climb those steps on the south side. So Jesus would have climbed these steps. There's another passage to get in that pilgrims would take in, but eventually everybody had to climb these steps on the south. And what's interesting, if you look at the steps, you can see the first two steps are equal. They're probably like about 9 inches wide. And then you have a step that's about 15 inches. And you have a step of 9 and 15, 9, 15, 9, 9, 15, 9. Now, the reason why they did this is that they did not, when the temple was built, they did not want people rushing up. They wanted people to go up and to take their time and to be very deliberate as they climbed the steps. Because remember, everybody went up the southern steps to get into the Temple Mount, to go to the court for the Gentiles, the court of the Jews, the men, the women, therefore. Now, another thing about this is that as you were going up, you would contemplate, not us, talking about the Jews. So you would climb those two. When you get to the third one, you would stop and you maybe pray or you would contemplate. So it was the way it was built. And when you got to the top and you got inside, you were on the Temple Mount and you would see the temple. Of course, now you don't see the temple. What do you see? You see the Dome of the Rock. And this is a picture, a very nice picture of the Dome of the Rock that I took with all the mosaic. This is where literally I was able to check off one of my bucket lists because it's very difficult to get up to the Temple Mount. Do Jews go up there? Yes, they do, but they don't like to because there's always a conflict going on. Remember, you've got Muslims going up there 5 times a day, not to go to the Dome of the Rock, but to go to the other mosque to pray. And when they're praying, they are praying toward the east. They're praying toward the southeast. And the reason why they're praying toward the southeast, of course, is they're praying toward Mecca. And that is right where they're praying is where the passageway that the Jews can go up. And there's always conflicts going on. Now you have a lot of the Jerusalem police up there, which are their Israeli police officers trying to keep things under control. But the day that we were supposed to go up there was Jerusalem Day. And Jerusalem Day was a celebration of the 6-Day War. And there were thousands of Jews up there and thousands of Arabs and Muslims up there. And so we could not get up there. I'm glad we didn't go up there. What we did do is go the next day. Now you think about in the U.S. when we have a holiday. When you have a holiday, the next day, you have the 4th of July, everything's going on. The next day is the 5th of July, nothing's going on. So when we went up there, we went up there around 7:45 in the morning and nobody was up there. That's how we were able to get up there. There are a few groups that can get up there. You have to check ahead, and it's not that you have to get permission, but they're not going to let you go up there. The Muslims will not let you go up there with anything that's religious. So you cannot be wearing anything like a cross. You cannot have anything religious on your shirt. If you were a Catholic priest, you could not be wearing your collar. You cannot carry a Bible up there. We saw one group that came from Moody Bible Institute up there. You cannot go up there. You cannot pray. You cannot talk about the Bible. You cannot do anything. All you can do is walk around and sightsee. They're very, very cautious about this. Is the Muslim, and even the Jews, the Jewish police are the same way. They do not want you up there because if you're doing anything like that, then most definitely there's going to be a conflict and something's going to happen. So here's a picture of Janelle and I in front of the mosque. The Dome of the Rock. I did try to get in. That's actually the entrance back there. There is one guy sitting there. I walked up to him. I said, can I go inside? He goes, Muslim only. And you say, how do they know? Why wouldn't I just say, hey, I'm Muslim, let me in? Well, it's because they ask you a series of questions, and that only a Muslim would know. And it's not the same questions for each Muslim either. Some of them could be the 5 pillars. Other ones could be, recite part of the Quran. They'll tell you what part to recite, and they'll catch you really quickly. Of course, I look like a tourist. They wouldn't let me in anyhow. But I did try to get in. The guy thought for a second because no one was there, and he said, no, Muslim only. So I could not get in. Now, what's inside of the Dome of the Rock? Well, that is actually Mount Moriah. And there's the rock. Now, this is a stock picture. I did not take, obviously I could not get inside. Actually, in 1975, Janelle did get inside and saw the Dome of the Rock. And she saw Mount Moriah. What happened on Mount Moriah? Well, first of all, it's the center of the Temple Mount. It's the very center of that mountain, Mount Moriah. They actually cut off part of it to build. Solomon cut off part of it to build it, but he left the rock coming up. And that rock is actually the center of the Holy of Holies, of where the Holy of Holies was. This is where Abraham was thought to sacrifice Isaac. Now, I've had people say, well, do the Muslims think that that Abraham tried to sacrifice Ishmael there? No. Remember, Ishmael was one of the founders of Islam, long before, of course, we know Muhammad founded Islam, but long before that group of people. No, that happened, they think, further south, closer to Hebron. But the Jews believe this is where Abraham attempted to sacrifice Isaac before God stopped him. But why is it under Muslim control? Because during the 6-Day War, the Israelis took over the Temple Mount, but they realized that they would continue to be attacked by the Arabs and the Muslims if they didn't give in about something. So what they did is they gave in about the West Bank, but they did not give in about Jerusalem. They said, we have complete control over Jerusalem. They created a Muslim section of Jerusalem, which is considered Eastern Jerusalem. And they went in there as far as the old city. They said, you can still have a Muslim section, Armenian, Christian, and Jewish section. But they said, we will let you have, the Dome of the Rock. And that can stay your holy place. Now, why was that such a holy place to the Muslims? Because they believe this is where Muhammad came and went to heaven to get the 5 pillars of faith that is of Islam. So that's why this is such a religious site. This is one of the 3 religious sites for Islam. Mecca, Medina, where Muhammad started, and then Jerusalem here at Mount Moriah, where Muhammad went to heaven to get the 5 pillars of faith. And going into the late 70s is when the Muslims decided to close it off where only Muslims could go in here. It's kind of a little bit of a slap they did to the Jews. But the Jews, once again, to keep the Arabs, Muslims happy so they wouldn't invade them again, tried to invade them. That's what started the 6-Day War. They gave in to that. And here's the Golden Gate. And you remember the Golden Gate was sealed by the Muslims. This is where the Messiah is supposed to come in. And here's a picture of Janelle and I on the Temple Mount with the Golden Gate behind us. Now, you can go into here, but we could not get in there because it was one of the 5 times during the day they're praying. And so you can see the doorways down the very bottom, and what you cannot see on the other side of the wall are all the prayer carpets, and they would go in there, and of course they're going to be praying toward the southeast, which is Mecca. But the Jews believe that this is where the Messiah is going to come from. Walking around the Temple Mount, like I said, no one was up there. It was awesome. Nobody was up there. But I do want to point out to you is that this is what it's like. They have lots of olive trees and other types of trees. See the little yellow thing hanging from there? That's the shellfly strip. You remember those back in the 1960s and 70s? They had these things hanging everywhere because the number of mosquitoes and flies up there is phenomenal. Now, the Muslims are in charge of keeping this clean, even though the Israeli are the security people up there, but you also have some Muslim security people too. They kind of work together, their own security force. But the janitorial staff is a Muslim, and here's a picture of one of them. Don't you wish all the janitors in this world dress so nicely, and they go around and they sweep it and keep everything clean? Now, remember I told you you have a Israeli bridge to get up. There's a wooden bridge that goes right through where the prayer is. That's the Muslim prayer. That's one reason why I think you have a situation where you have conflict. But the Muslims come up with a different way. They come up a passage, and this is the actual passage that they come up, and this is also the way that everybody leaves through from the Temple Mount. Now, the next thing I want to tell you about is a little bit about the Orthodox. So all throughout Israel, about 10 to 15% of the inhabitants are Orthodox Jews, and they're everywhere. And here's a picture of them. And you can always kind of spot them by, they wear the black coats, the white shirts, they have the black hats, and of course the sideburns. They have the curled sideburns. So I'm sure they spend some serious time curling those. They all got the beards too. And then you've got some that where there are different orders. They have a different type of hat, still the sideburns in the beard. And then you've got some that are a different Orthodox Jewish order. And they're not doing the sideburns, but they still have the beards. You notice they have a different type of hat. Now, what's interesting about this is that every time we've been there, the tour guide has been very nice and polite talking about them, but you can tell that the people, the Jews, are not happy with the Orthodox. And the reason why is because of two reasons. Number one is they do not have to serve in the military. Every Jewish boy and girl, when they graduate from high school, they have to serve in the Jewish military for 2 years. After 2 years, then they can come out. They either go to college or they'll go get a job someplace. But even at that point, they have 4 to 6 more years that they're in the Jewish military reserve. So if you're an Orthodox Jew, you are not required to serve in the military. And to serve in the military is a very much of a badge of honor for the Jewish people, because you could go around, everybody served in the military, everyone belonged to a different battalion, so it's a badge of honor. So they're a little irritated that these Orthodox Jews don't do that. The second thing that irritates them is that they don't work. They don't have to work. Their job is to pray. And so how do they make their money? Well, the government gives them money. So there is a tax on the Jewish people that is collected, that is then given, that money is then given to the Orthodox Jews, and that's the way they live. Now, yes, they may have a little farm, they may have some animals, but they don't work. They live in communities too, so you don't see them blended into other communities. They all live in their little separate communities. So you have various communities of the Orthodox Jews. So something that's kind of very interesting about when you see these type of people, you can tell the Jewish people, they respect them, but you can see that there's a little bit of irritation because they don't work, they get money from the government, and they don't serve in the military. After we went through Jerusalem, we kind of backtracked and went into Bethlehem. Bethlehem is in the West Bank. Now, what that means is that it is still part of Israel, is controlled by Israel. You've got around certain areas, you have the Israeli army, but they have a Palestinian authority who governs. You have a Palestinian mayor, you have Palestinian security forces, so they kind of stay away from each other. You see a lot of fences where they're trying to fence off things. A Palestinian cannot go into a Jewish area without having to have a pretty good reason, and the Jews will not go much into the West Bank unless they have a decent reason, and that would be maybe tourism, but they pretty much stay out. When we were there in 2013, our tour guide would not go into Bethlehem. He would not go into the West Bank. When we were here recently, our tour guide would drop off. He would be drop off outside of Bethlehem. He would not go into Bethlehem because it was Palestinian. And when you go into Bethlehem, this is a picture of the Church in the Nativity. Once again, Helen founded this church. This is not the original church. There are several churches been built on top of this, but this is a fairly decent picture. But this is the actual entrance to the Church in the Nativity. Now you can see at one point it was a very big opening. And then underneath, if you can see, there's an ark. And then what you really cannot see is the true opening, because the true opening is 4.5 feet tall and probably maybe 2 feet wide. And what that was done was that was built by the Crusaders, because before the Crusaders, the Muslims were riding horses into the Church of the Nativity. It didn't mean anything to them. They were trying to convert it into a mosque, and they decided not to. Remember, Helen had founded this back in 326, 325, 326. So when the Crusaders were there in the 1200s, when they kicked out the Muslims, they went in there and they walled up the big opening and even the arch, so that when you went inside the Church of the Nativity, you could not ride in there with a horse. As a matter of fact, what's interesting, you had to either get on your knees to get in there, or you have to bow to get in there. And that was Crusaders saying the way that you are paying respect. You're either bowing for the Lord, or you're on your knees going into the Church of Nativity. We get inside now. The Church of Nativity is controlled by the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, Eastern Orthodox. The top part this is the Eastern Orthodox temple. The Catholics have a temple over to the side. Not a temple, I'm sorry. The sanctuary. So you can see, once again, the Eastern Orthodox very ornate with it. Below this is where the manger was the birthplace. And here's a very nice stock picture of it, because there's always tons of people in there. Here's a stock picture, and once again, because this is below the worship space of the Eastern Orthodox, you can see where the Orthodox, they have made this very ornate. And here's a picture I took. This is the star where the manger was placed, right here. And of course, what they did is they have built around marble. That's not the original stone. They have put the silver star there to it. And so people go there. Of course, they're kissing this star, but this is the place where Jesus was born by tradition. Was he literally born in this place? I don't know. But by tradition, they say he was. I believe he was born somewhere around this area at the church, because on the other side of the wall was where St. Jerome constructed the Vulgate. And this is also where it's believed that Joseph got the vision that he needed to take Mary and the baby Jesus to Egypt. But they have a lot of good information that says this is where Jerome lived, where he wrote the Vulgate. They have that pretty much verified. And Jerome chose this place because this is where, by tradition, Joseph had the vision. So that's the reason why I think that somewhere in the church is actually where Jesus was born. After this, we continued on, and we went to a place that was very much Jewish, really based upon Judaism, and that was Masada. Now, Masada is the top of, it's in the Jewish desert. It was where Herod the Great built his winter palace. And the other thing about Masada is that you can see here by this picture here is at the southern portion of the Dead Sea. And you see the Dead Sea continues down a little bit beyond that, but it's getting near the southern portion. What's important about this in Judaism is that in 70 AD, remember the Romans, they destroyed the temple, and about 900 Jewish people, men and women and children, they were revolting against the Romans. And the Romans were trying to squash it. As a matter of fact, when they do squash it, they changed the name of Israel or Judah. They changed it to Palestine. And that's they did that because of the Philistines in Gaza. You see Gaza still? That was called Philistia. So they decided to do a little bit of a slam by calling it Palestine. But the last place of resistance was Masada, where these 900 Jewish men, women, and children went up. And they went up to this place, and they stayed up there, and the Romans eventually built a land bridge. And when they got up there, the Jewish people had all committed suicide because they didn't want to go into slavery. They didn't want to be sold. So they all committed suicide. And that was the beginning of the dispersion of the Jewish people. At that point, Israel ceased. and the Jewish people that remained, few stayed there, but most of them started to move elsewhere. But before this was the Jewish stronghold, this was Herod's temple. This was his winter palace. I'm sorry, not temple, his winter palace. And here's a picture of it. And you can see it was the top of the mountain. He leveled it off, and he cut off the top of the mountain. And then you see the southern part of it, or the bottom part of it, is where his palace was. And here's a good picture, aerial view picture of it, called the Masada project, or the Mandani project. And you can see the way it actually looked. And you can see his palace was in 3 different layers. Here's another picture of it. You can see how they had the storehouses, they had different areas, they had a synagogue back there. And here's a picture of what it would have looked like, his palace, with the 3 different layers. So Herod would go there, and you sit there and say, now, why would he go there? Why would this be a winter palace? Well, first of all, it's very hot there. The northern part, remember, he was up there in Caesarea Maritime, but it did get cooler up there, so he would come here. He was a paranoid king, so he would get up there so that no one could attack him, but also it had a great view of the Dead Sea. It was very, very well protected. He was always scared about revolts, so he had a great sense of protection that he could bring army up there. And then once again, if you're up there looking down, this is looking now on the 2nd level of his palace. Now, how did you get up here? You did it through this cable car. And you can see how far it is. Now, can you walk up there? Yeah, you can see a little path. I believe it's like a 1.5 mile path. It is very hot there, just like Jericho. This is not that far. You're probably talking about 100, 102 or 3 degrees. I imagine what it is in the August. Now, if you look over far to the left, you can't see the very tip corner. You're starting to see the Dead Sea. So the Dead Sea, and here's a picture of it. Why is it called the Dead Sea? It's because nothing grows there. And the reason why is because the mineral base is salt. You can do exactly what this hand is shown by a stock picture. You can reach down to the Dead Sea and you can scoop up all these salt crystals. And you can see that also the Dead Sea is dying, not only because nothing survives there because it has 10 times the amount of salt as the ocean, but also because it's evaporating. The Dead Sea is fed by the Jordan River, which starts up in the very far north by the underground springs that feeds the Sea of Galilee, which is slowly evaporating too, and then that feeds down to the Dead Sea. But because it's so hot here, the water is evaporating, and I would say probably in the past 15 years, it has moved in about a mile on all sides, so it is shrinking on us. And here's a picture you can see of the Dead Sea, and also at the same time you can see the 12 tribes of Israel. So you can see the green, that's Judah, and then you see the blue above that is Benjamin. That was the tribe, that was Judea with Simeon down there, and the top 10 tribes of Manasseh and Gad and Dan and all these people, those were the northern tribes. So you can see the Sea of Galilee was up there in the northern, the northern tribes, which was the kingdom of Israel. And then you can see the Dead Sea is down there in the southern, which was Judah in there. Here's a great picture of the Dead Sea, because what you can see here is it looks like foam. That's actually salt. That is salt that's being pushed up. And here's me in the Dead Sea. This is an area where you don't see as much salt. You can walk out there, and the nice thing about the Dead Sea is that, and this is Janelle and I, this is a picture back in 2013 when we were floating out there. No life preservers, no flotation device. You don't need it because of the 10 times the amount of salt. All you do is lay back. When you lay back, you will not sink. You just lay there and you just float. Now, this sounds pretty cool, but let me tell you the problem is that you don't want to get your head in the water, because if you get that salt water in your eyes, you will not be able to open your eyes. And one of my friends who was traveling with us did that. He could not even see to get out, and he finally felt his way over to the water faucets to wash out his eye or eyes. Now, going south from there, we went down to Eilat. And Eilat is the southern resort But along the way, if you look there about just a little bit from the top, you see a place that's called Timnah. Timnah Mountains. Timnah Mountains is also known as the Solomon's copper mines. This is where Solomon, when he was building the temple, was getting the copper from. Now, if you remember the story about about Moses, you know, they're going through all this different area. And one of the things is down this area is where they built the ark, the first temple. And so in this area, you can see all the different copper mines. I actually took a rock out of it. And so when they're building this first of the Ark of the Covenant and the temple, the mobile temple, they're using copper. And this is where they're getting the copper from. So here's a diagram, and at the same place, they have a replica of it. Here's a replica of what that first mobile temple looked like and how they were putting copper on the side of it and also gold too. So here is where they would do the sacrifices, and this thing was covered with copper. So all the copper came from these mountains that later were known as Solomon's copper mines. So once again, here we are. We're moving down to the south, and we get to Elat, where the Red Sea is. And there's Janelle and I looking over Elat, which is in Israel, in the Red Sea. And if you look across, you see Aqaba. Aqaba is the Jordan side. You probably remember that from the movie Aladdin. Aqaba, okay, I couldn't find Aladdin or Jasmine over there by no means. I couldn't find the temples or the palaces or anything. But Aqaba is the main port for Jordan. Jordan is landlocked, so all the anything that comes to them has to come up through the Red Sea, through the Gulf there, and they dock there in Aqaba and then is trucked on up. Israel has 3 ports that are on the west side on the Mediterranean, and the main one is Ashdod, followed by Tel Aviv, and then the next main one is Haifa, and those are all seaports for them. Now, interesting enough, to get from Israel over to Jordan, you got to go through the land crossings, and here's a picture of a departure hall that you go through. It's very, very busy in there. Now this is a stock picture, but this is fairly similar to what it looks like, these departure and arrival halls. You go in there, you go through all the passport controls with the Jordanians. You're just coming back, you're doing with the Israeli. Well, the reason why I want to tell you about this is that you go through those duty-free shops. Everybody in Jordan smokes. Everybody smokes. I've never seen somebody smokes. This is the cigarette haven for the world, apparently, to the point that the Jordanian authorities have started to put packaging, just like, we have the warning labels on our cigarettes, says warning, Surgeon General says can cause cancer. Here are some of the packaging they put on there. Smoking causes aging of the skin. This is something that's probably put for the women. No woman wants their skin to age. They can't spell the word aging correctly in English, but I guess everyone knows what that is. But, I don't think the men are that concerned about the aging of the skin, but I think they are more concerned about smoking can damage the sperm and decrease fertility. Now, you remember that, the big deal is to have as many children as you can. The Jordanians, they're Arabs. They're partly Arabs, but they're Jordanians. They're almost all Muslim. They want to have lots of children, and they certainly want to have lots of boys. You want an heir and a spare and another spare and another spare. So you can imagine that when you see this, you're about to buy your pack of cigarettes, and you say, oh my gosh, it can damage my sperm, it can decrease my fertility. That's a reason to put that carton of cigarettes back. So why did we go to Jordan? We went to Jordan because we wanted to see Harrison Ford. And of course, you know what this is. This is the picture from the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where they're riding horseback, he and Sean Connery, after they save the Holy Grail, and they're leaving Petra. And so when you go to Petra, you go through these passages just like this here. They did put it where it is concrete to walk on, but you can see all these walls, these mountains that the passage is carved between. And you walk your way, you walk about 1.5 miles, and you're walking downhill, and you get to the first site. And of course, that's the major site, and this is the treasury. And of course, that's the one that was in that Harrison Ford movie. And this was the treasury. And this goes back to about 500 to 600 AD. So this thing is not BC, but this was a treasury. And here's a picture of Janelle and I in front of the treasury. Once again, very hot there. You walk down, and if you keep going down, you get to see things like, you get to see the theater, you get to see the monastery. Here's a picture of the royal tombs, that, where there were buried people inside of it. And all of this was lots of fun to see, but then you have to walk uphill for 1.5 miles in 100-degree heat. Well, you can take a donkey, or you can take a horse, or living up to 2022, they have golf carts. Yes, it costs you $20 a person, but they'll take you up in a golf cart, and believe me, it was well worth it. Now, I've talked to you a little bit about the Christianity part of the tour. I've talked to you a little bit about the Judaism. Now I'm going to talk to you about this last part, which is the Israeli Jewish nationalism. As I kind of come to the end of the presentation here, these people are very nationalistic. That means they're really proud of their country. You remember the story, and perhaps you don't, but after the Romans conquered Israel, burned the temple, they killed the last holdout force at Masada, or actually they killed themselves when the Romans found them. The Jewish people dispersed. A few of them stayed back. The Romans call it Palestine, or however you want to pronounce it. And the Jewish people went to Iran, Iraq, they went to Turkey, they went up to Eastern Europe, they went up to Germany, Russia. Not until probably 1800s did you start seeing them starting to slowly come back, but they were by far a minority because the people who stayed there were known as Palestinians, and they were Arabs. So the Jewish people were a minority. But what happened in 1970 made the big flip. And that was the Ottoman Empire, which controlled all of this area. Turkey, they controlled Syria, they controlled the Sinai, they controlled Egypt, they controlled Israel, they controlled where Jordan is. The Ottoman Empire, because they're on the wrong side of World War I, they lost, and it was dissolved. And the British government came in there and took over control of the land of Israel and Jordan, and over parts of Egypt and parts of Syria too. And they tried to put order into it. When that happened, you started seeing more of the Jewish people coming down. But it wasn't until 1937 when Hitler started to move the Jews into concentration camps, you started to see a large influence of people coming down to Israel. I'm going to show you a little map here in a moment. And then in 1945, after the war, when the concentration camps were open and the Jews are left, they all came to Israel. And in 1947 and 1948 is when the UN voted to have Israel to have its own state. You had your Palestinian state, you had your Israel state. Now, when I was there a few weeks ago, or back in, let's just say, in the summer of 22, it was a very nationalistic holiday, and that was Jerusalem Day. And while I was there, you see the guy in the very center with the kipput, the yarmulke, the white one with the Star of David on top. If you look a little bit toward his left, here's a closer picture, you see who he's next to, and I was probably about 20 feet away from him. That's Netanyahu. So Netanyahu had come to the Western Wall. He came there to the Western Wall to put a piece of paper in, and came also to see me. No, he didn't come to see me. But then, of course, the masses of the people were following him because that was Jerusalem Day, which celebrated the end of the Six-Day War, which occurred 52 years or 56 years later, that's or before. And here's a picture of the people as they were doing their parade at the Damascus Gate. Now, the Damascus Gate is the most northern gate on the Temple Mount of the Old City. The reason why they prayed through that on Jerusalem Day is because they are saying that, we overtook Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. At the same time, Hamas, who is in Gaza, Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon, said, if you go through this gate, we're going to fire missiles at Tel Aviv. That's what they did last year, which started the 11th day war in 2021. Well, nothing happened. All the Jewish people got together. They had their parades. I wouldn't even call it a parade. It's more like a huge congregation of people walking through the streets, going through the Damascus Gate. Here's a picture on the left of our hotel, the David Citadel. And when we looked out our window, these are the streets of Jerusalem. So very, very, very nationalistic. They really, really do support their country. And remember I told you about that once you graduated from high school that you had to join the Army. That's why all the Army is so young. Look at these pictures. And they all carry their guns. It's fascinating because all over the street, you go into a store, you go into a pharmacy, anywhere you go, you're going to see the Army. They're all young kids, 18, 19. You see a few officers in there who are in their mid to late 30s. You see them down there as you're going through the desert too. And they carry their gun when they're on duty. When they're not on duty, they don't have to carry the gun, but they still quite often carry it, but they always are wearing their uniform. And this is to show the military presence, in the country. I don't know how many thousands of soldiers there are, but the next picture is a fascinating picture because it shows you how Israel's changed. And I learned a lot of this because this is another good reason to go to Israel, is understand the history of what happened. So here's a good picture. And you look at 1917. You remember the Ottoman Empire fell. And this point, it was Palestinians. That's all it was. And as the Jewish people started to come back, they had no control of anything. Of course, this is a stock picture. They had no control of any part of Israel today. Everything was Palestinian. But by 1946, remember I told you that after Hitler started to create these concentration camps and started to condemn the Jewish people, many of them started coming down. You can see that they started taking little bits and pieces of land, Haifa and then Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv was nothing until they started coming down. Then they started to build up that city. But still, there was very little to do with it. And then in 1947 is when we had the independence. And that was when the UN voted to create two separate states, the Palestinian state and the Israeli state. So at this point, you can see what they gave to the Jewish people. What's there in green? They gave them the southern part, which is nothing but a desert. Okay, nothing there, nothing but a desert. They kept Gaza as Palestinian. That area there over the side, that is what is known now as the West Bank. They kept that as Palestinian. And then up there around the Golan Heights, and not quite all the Golan Heights, but the northern area, they left that as Palestinian. But Jerusalem was Palestinian, Bethlehem, Jericho. And then in 1948, you started seeing that at this point, the independence was taken hold. And you see where Jerusalem was split between the Israelis and the Arabs. Lots of fighting going on. You can see they took a little bit more of the Gaza Strip, but they took a whole part of the Golan Heights. And this is where you have, if you're watching any movies about it, you see that, you still had a problem with the people of Syria, in Jordan, in Egypt. You had the Arabs, and those countries were still controlled by the British. But at this point, the UN started to divide those countries off too, but the Arabs were trying to take back Israel. Not a whole lot happened in 1956. It looks like basically about the same. And then 2012, if you look at this here, you can see the Gaza Strip is still a mess. But you look at the part that's Palestinian, Bethlehem, Jerusalem is no longer Palestinian. It's all Israeli now. But you can see the outline of the West Bank. And so the outline of the West Bank is what it was. You go back to 1956. Even though now it's controlled by the Jews, you can see the areas within the West Bank that actually had the Palestinian mayors and the Palestinian security forces, and you had the government in there. So this is a good, and if you ever watch any of those videos or you watch the movie Exodus, it's great to kind of understand a little bit more about what's happening in Israel. Last of all, here's the picture of what it looks like. You can see the West Bank. You can see Jordan was formed. Before that, it was called Transjordan, but then the United Nations formed Jordan. Egypt became a country under its own control outside of the control of Britain, and then Syria the same way. And the last pictures I want to show you this is from my hotel, the Indigo Hotel, when I was quarantined, because right before I flew out, not only did I get COVID, also got traveler's diarrhea, the stomach bug, and picked up somehow a poison ivy in the process. But this was on the top of my hotel. I was in the downtown Diamond District. Israel is a very modern place, even though that you can go into the desert and you see the nomads in the deserts. And with that, folks, that is the end of our presentation. I'm sorry that it's so long. You probably are watching this in different segments, but I do appreciate you listening to this presentation.